In this video, we'll be taking an in-depth look at some of the techniques that colorist Matt Wilson used to create focus, depth, and atmosphere in this amazing Avengers cover. Well, it's not amazing Avengers. It's Avengers, and it's amazing. But you know what I'm saying. And who could better explain Matt's thought process than Matt Wilson himself? You might know Matt's work from Thor, Avengers, Captain America, Daredevil, Black Widow, The Wicked and the Divine, Paper Girls, the new Conan. He's one of the best in the business, former Eisner winner, Harvey nominee, so I was very happy when he offered to discuss this cover with you guys, so stay tuned. Alright, welcome everyone. My name is K. Michael Russell. I am a comic book colorist, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Here we talk a lot about color, and I try to help you guys understand color a little bit better. And I wanted to quickly tell you guys kind of how this video came together. So I saw this cover on Twitter, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, I could do 10 lessons just on what Matt's done on this one cover. And so I reached out to Matt just to get permission and ask if he minded if I discussed his work on the channel in this video. And instead he said, well, what if I just come on and we talk about it? Yeah, that works too. So very happy to have him here. Matt, can you talk about how you initially approach a cover like this and sort of break down what your thought process is here? I think a lot of non-colorists would be surprised at what all goes into what appears to be a pretty straightforward cover.
Yeah, I mean, so if like you've colored comics at all, or you know, colored covers at all, like you're gonna end up getting this kind of like generic hero posed cover, you know, like all of them standing there looking at the camera, and so, and oftentimes if you color as long as I have, you get a lot of them over your career. So like it's a pretty commonly used composition, and sometimes they can be the hardest because, you know, structurally it's pretty straightforward. So to add, you know, a lot of times the interest to make them dynamic or exciting has to be done in the coloring stage.
Mm-hmm.
So that's usually my first thought, is how best can I draw, you know, pull the focus to where I want it to be pulled, or where it seems like the artist is intending it to be pulled, using color. And then how can I make it as exciting as possible or as interesting as possible? You know, luckily this one, you know, a lot of times you'll get these kinds of covers and it'll just be nothing drawn in the background, and then you really got to do the heavy lifting. I was fortunate in this one, at least, that David has some sort of explosion, so that was kind of an obvious first, you know, clue as to what I might do with this, a nice bright warm background kind of thing. But yeah, so I mean, you're looking at the black and white before I've kind of thought of any of this. The first thing I would see, though, is separation of planes. I think in my work, especially when I started, and I still don't think I'm that great at rendering, but I was really bad when I started, and so while trying to get better at it, also, you know, made sure I focused on other elements of coloring that I thought I had some strengths in, so I could kind of, you know, mask my deficiencies in rendering. And my biggest one has always been separation of planes, because even if it's flat colors in a panel or a cover, if I've separated the planes very clearly, that makes the image that much more dynamic, like right off the bat, before I've even had to do any fancy rendering or lighting tricks or, you know, special effects type stuff, just because it gives depth to an image. You know, you've got a lot of things to process in the image if you've separated the planes, the foreground, middle ground, background, in a way that kind of tricks the reader, the viewer, into thinking that the image is more complex than it might be. You know,
Absolutely, yeah.
So first thing I would look at this and go, okay, how can I separate these planes, or, you know, where's the obvious breaks in these planes? And in this one, I'd say there's even maybe more than 3, or there's like a 2A in there. There's like, you know, on the biggest picture, you'd say it's Blade is foreground, the rest of the characters are middle ground, the explosions background. But again, like I was referencing earlier, you know, I'm looking for ways to push the excitement and you know, how dynamic this cover can be. And so I kind of took that second plane and decided, with all the rest of the Avengers in there, that I'm going to kind of put plenty of separation between that middle row of Hulk and Ghost Rider and Black Panther and Iron Man and Captain America. I'm going to separate them even from Thor and Captain Marvel a bit. because that just gives us one more plane of separation, therefore making the image that much more interesting. I look for little ways to do that. I remember a cover specifically where I kind of started having that revelation, and I think it was a Thor cover with Russell Dowderman as the line artist, and it was like real simple, kind of like just Thor and Loki, but he had put him in this interesting like Norse like kind of iconography or whatever. It was a real graphic kind of cover, not a real literal cover. And I remember thinking like, oh, it's just these two characters. How can I add depth and interest? And so I thought of things like maybe in real life, the distance from my nose to like my hand, if it's behind me, if I'm kind of posed with like head forward, one arm behind me, like the distance from the front of my face to the back of my hand in reality isn't that far. But to add interest to this image, what if I really push the space between, the front of someone's body and the back of someone's body, or like the face where I want you to focus and like down by their thighs where I don't want you to focus? What if I start pushing and pulling space and creating more depth in shorter kind of physical spaces, so that kind of thing has carried forward since I kind of started thinking about it in some of that Thor cover. I've employed a lot of that here, really finding places to add depth that maybe in the real world, like, there wouldn't be that big a difference between the lighting from, this part of their face to that part of their leg or whatever. But so those are kind of the main tricks I'm employing here. And then obviously kind of just obvious color temperature contrasts with, warms next to cools, stuff like that. So.
Yeah, one thing that I talk about on the channel quite a bit is how, realism in coloring is not a high priority. Like it's always kind of story first. And I was noticing, I didn't notice this when I watched this, looked at this the first time, but even the difference in her hand and Captain Marvel's hand, her left hand and her right hand, you've got that glow in between that's, pulling that left arm forward and pushing that right arm back, even within, one person's body. And like you said, it's not something in, maybe reality that would happen, but it's a trick you can use, like you said, to create some more depth there.
Yeah. And then you move up to her head and her hair, and it kind of, I'm doing the same thing from the, I guess our left side of her hair is real blown out to like the other side is a little more, in focus and detail. And her face is very much more in focus and detail. And cause like, I want you to look at her. It solved a bunch of problems. I wanted you to look at her face, not the backside of her hair. I wanted separation between that shape of her hair and Blade's spikes, on his back. Then doing that solved multiple problems in that case. And similarly with her hand, her left hand comes much more forward. Her right hand drops farther back, and then her right hand, as you can see in the black and white, like it's the same black as Blade's line art is black. I mean, it's done a little thinner line weight, so it does recede in the black and white, but I wanted to make sure all of that pushed even further back from Blade. I needed Blade to be well-defined and pushed forward. So a lot of that is, and I don't like immediately see, like if I go, oh, I'm going to blow out her hand and her hair, I'm thinking more about Captain Marvel. And then I go, oh, cool, look how it's actually helping me like contrast it. But I don't see
happy
like
accident happy accident, as Bob Ross used to say.
Exactly. So there's plenty of happy accidents. I mean, this is like, it's like a, solving a puzzle on a train or something. It's like I get to the end and the puzzle's solved, but like, I didn't know all the steps I was going to take along the journey or whatever. The train's moving along and I'm figuring stuff out as we go, kind of thing. I wouldn't be surprised if because I did this cover quite a while ago, but I wouldn't be surprised if I had done the whole group of Avengers, except for Blade, as a thing, and then thought, they're all kind of, I'd like to define certain edges better. Oh, maybe if I push Captain Marvel and Thor back another step, like that'll help me define She-Hulk's shoulder and the top of Iron Man and Cap's head and stuff like that. I think I wouldn't be surprised if like I just thought, oh, I'm going to push this back as a whole thing, and then discovered, oh, actually, I'm going to push another step. So I think that's maybe. I remember as an art student seeing finished comic pages like in like published printed form or whatever, and then seeing original art and going, holy crap, look at all the whiteout marks. Look at, this black isn't all black. And the light bulb going off in my head and going, sorry. And prior to that, me thinking I needed to make my original art or the art I'm making look exactly like it looks when it's published. And I didn't, there was a disconnect there that I didn't realize, like, oh, the art they're producing doesn't necessarily look exactly like the art that's finished for, publication. And that can kind of go, in the coloring world where there's not quite that jump from digital to, but like, I don't see every exact thing in the black and white file. I get there over time. There's a lot of push and pull and experimentation and stuff. So I know for me, at least, like, being afraid of like not being able to hit it just right on the first try maybe kept me from progressing as fast as I would have liked. So I would say just like, don't worry about that and get in there and experiment. So.
Yeah, that's one thing I've tried to do sometimes, and people seem to enjoy it, is to kind of break down, because it's exactly like what you said. Like, a lot of people that didn't understand the process as well would look at this and think, man, how did he choose this exact, shade of dark red, gray that, and it's like, well, he probably didn't. It's like he worked through this in layers, and some things happen. And instead of trying to duplicate the final process, trying to understand the process itself, get you a long way.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you do color holds, and for those of you that aren't familiar with the term, it's changing the color of the lines in comics. And one thing that I've been experimenting with lately, and I think I was talking to Dave McKay in a Facebook group about this one time, and I think he said he started doing it too, which is to do the color holds first, and then let that see what that accomplishes for you, and then render, after the fact, which is kind of out of order. People kind of generally think, oh, well, you do color holds last. It's kind of the quote unquote, general rule or whatever. But can you talk a little bit about that and where that fits in your process?
No, that I started out definitely thinking like, oh, this is the way it has to be done. So I did everything that way. And then over time realized where I could, break those rules or change them a little to suit my purposes, either in my process overall or like, oh, just on this specific piece, it works better to break this rule. Anyway, so I definitely started with thinking color holds are just the thing you do at the very end. It's a finishing touch. It's a nice little detail piece. But I came to that same realization that you said Dave expressed, which is, and you can apply this also to sometimes, again, I don't do this the same in every book or every page even. It just depends on the scene or what's happening in the art, is can also apply that sometimes to any glows or kind of, real special effects stuff that might kind of obscure some of the art or whatever. Is sometimes if I look at a page and I go, man, that's a lot of explosions. That's a lot of color holds. That's a lot of, whatever. I will do those first, because then that tells me, okay, well, that whole leg is like kind of obscured by that explosion and that whatever. Well, then I don't need to render it. I don't need to paint highlights it. Like, you can't even see it after this glow. So if there's a lot of that stuff going on, color holds or explosions, like sometimes doing it on the front end basically tells you what you don't have to do, on what would normally be the front end. So I'm in full agreement that I don't do it every time. But like I said, if I look at a page and I think, oh, that may be the case, let me explore that avenue and see where it gets me. And, sometimes that leads to those happy accidents we were talking about where, you blow something out and you're like, oh, look at that contrast and, or lack of contrast or whatever. And I don't do it on every book. Like, for example, Paper Girls. Sorry, I had to blank there for a second. It utilizes a lot of color holds, but kind of in a stylistic way.
Mm-hmm.
So like in that book, I don't think about them separately because it's just, they're a thing I do at the end and they're already kind of laid out because Cliff and I have kind of set up a pattern of what we use them for and that kind of thing. But then like in a cover like this, even looking back at this cover, I'm trying to recall exactly, but I bet you I would have done a lot of this color hold stuff and kind of glows and whatever, just to see how much I really needed to render and that kind of thing. So in something that's a little where I'm using color holds in a little more complicated way is where I'm more likely to do it on the front end, to kind of break those rules, those old rules of thinking you only did it on the end.
So before we wrap this video up, I just wanted to make sure you guys understood what we were talking about here when we talk about pushing and pulling thing, because that might not be obvious to everybody. It's really all about contrast and playing with different types of contrast. Because I think a lot of people, when they hear contrast, they just think, oh, well, that's light versus dark, right? And that is one type of contrast. For example, in this image, we've got, very light areas around the very dark areas of Blade. That's one way to create contrast. Another way that Matt mentioned earlier is the dynamic between just warm and cool, which we talk about on this channel quite a bit, but Blade is very cool in this image, and most of the rest of the image is warm. I mean, there is some a little bit of blue here on Captain America, but it's very small, and so the warm-cool dynamic is another way we're playing with contrast here. And that's part of the reason why this image works so well, is because there's so many different types at play here, and so there's even a contrast in the amounts of contrast when you look at, say, Blade up in the front, very white whites, very dark darks. But when you compare that to, say, Thor and Captain Marvel here, it's a much flatter image, okay? And this can be hard to see, especially we're comparing completely different colors here. So if you convert this to black and white, and then I've also done a mosaic filter just to sort of strip out the details, you can just see the values. And you can see, obviously, the black inks make up a lot of Blade, and so that's a very dark aspect to him. We got the white sword. So that's a big dynamic range from very, very white to very, very dark. But look at the range in Captain Marvel. Other than her sash, which is a little bit darker, from her hair all the way down to the bottom, it's all really close to the same color gray when you look at it in black and white. The values of all these colors are very close to each other. And that's just the atmospheric perspective. So as you go further into the distance, things tend to get less and less contrasty. But compare this to even Captain America. We've got some pretty bright stuff in here. We've got some pretty dark stuff, but it's not quite as dark as what's on Blade. So we've got most contrast, and then the second, and then the third going back here. So when we talk about pushing and pulling things, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about creating more and creating less contrast. You can even see this, for example, like on her hands we were talking about earlier. There's a greater contrast with these highlights here compared to the color of her glove than back here, which is all pretty much just one value. So I want to make sure you guys caught all of that. Let's wrap it up. All right, Matt, thank you so much for your time again today. And tell the people where they can find you online. What projects do you have coming out? What are you excited about?
Cool. Yeah. Projects coming up. I'm coloring the next big event book at Marvel, which, depending on when you get this video up, it may be about to come out or just come out. But this spring and summer, early summer, is War of the Realms. Same creative team that was on The Mighty Thor during the Jane Foster Thor stuff. Jason Aaron writing, Russell Dowderman drawing, and myself coloring it. So that's coming up. Been working hard on that. It's a very hard book. Event books, 1 billion characters, drives me crazy. So that one's good. Paper Girls and The Wicked and the Divine, both creator-owned books published at Image, are wrapping up this year. So I would recommend catching up on those and maybe joining us for our big finales this year on both those series. Both have been great and going to wrap up really cool. And then, Conan at Marvel has also been a great thing I've been working on. I've really enjoyed that. So yeah, check those out. And then you can find me, find me on Twitter. I'm not there much, but if you @ me and ask a question, always happy to answer. Color and Matt, color, the word color, the letter N, Matt, no spaces, periods, dashes or anything, just Color and Matt. That goes for Instagram as well. But yeah, hit me up on any of those. Always happy to answer a question if I can.
All right, thanks a lot, Matt. Let's do this again.
Yeah, would love to.
I started to say let's do this again sometime. Got choked on it.
I hate when that happens.
I know you're a busy man, but so thanks a lot for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure, man. Yeah.
This was a ton of fun, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your support. If you enjoyed the video, share it, tweet it, Facebook it, Snapchat it, check it, chap. Yep, you know what I'm saying. See you in the next one.